On 4th of March, that newspaper was occupied brutally, and then I was kicked out of the newspaper, fired.
Just last week, 6 young Turkish journalists were arrested, subjected to humiliation by naked body search, and even the so-called Turkish opposition media didn't write anything about them.
Violence is like an earthquake. It has no winners, only losers. For 40 years now, Kurds and Turks have been fighting one another, while the children of other nations have invented smartphones, edited genes, crafted artificial intelligence, and dared to look for signs of life in distant planets. Why aren't our youth crazy about science or its parent, freedom?
Very important, since we are journalists here, and to mention that we need also international support. We need international voices to speak for us. What is happening in Turkey, what is happening in other countries, because it's not just Middle East Turkey. We have the Western, we have the EU countries where journalists are being indicted.
Erdogan regime is using immigration issue caused by the actions of the Turkish government against the EU countries, and it seems like that's part of the reason why there is a giving in.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the World Press Freedom Day 2024 event entitled Media and Turmoil, Persecuted and Exiled Journalists from Turkey. This event is organized by the Journalists and Writers Foundation in collaboration with the Advocates for Silence Turkey. I also would like to thank International Journalists Association for their journalism and technical support. Today, we are gathered here at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. to raise awareness to the grave threats faced by journalists in Turkey and around the world as we commemorate the important role of a free and independent press in a democratic society. As we mark the World Press Freedom Day 2024, it is crucial to acknowledge and address the challenges confronting journalists and human rights defenders in Turkey. The alarming threats of attacks on press freedom and freedom of expression must be brought to the forefront of our collective consciousness. Through panel discussions and conversations just like this, we aim to shine a light on the struggles faced by persecuted and exiled journalists, whom some of them are among us with us today at the National Press Club, and we would like to explore potential solutions to safeguard their rights. So basically, we will have two panel discussions today. The panel one will discuss the plight of persecuted journalists and human rights defenders, showcasing their struggles and shedding light on the Turkish government's attempts to suppress independent journalism. Panelists will discuss potential solutions to safeguard their rights of journalism and defend fundamental freedoms. And panel two will focus on the experiences of exiled journalists and human rights defenders from Turkey who persist their work despite of threats of intimidation, harassment, hate crimes, and transnational repression. Through their compelling stories, we will gain invaluable insights into the strategies employed by the Turkish government to silence critical voices, not only in Turkey, but across the globe. The stories of these courageous journalists serve as a reminder of the importance of a free press in holding power to account and ensuring transparency in society. By standing in solidarity with journalists and human rights defenders, we reaffirm our commitment to defending the essential right to press freedom. I invite you all to join us in this important conversation to listen and advocate for the protection of journalists and the preservation of press freedom. Together, let us work towards a world where journalists can carry out their vital work without any fear of persecution or retribution. Thank you for being with us today. And before we start our program, I would like to invite Mr. Mike Smith. He's the member of the Board of Governors of the National Press Club for his welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Mike Smith. I'm on the Board of Governors along with my colleagues from Global Strat View here and the moderator today. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the National Press Club. It is World Press Freedom Day tomorrow, but really it's World Press Freedom Week this week. And so it's a great chance to have this discussion. But the real reason I'm up here is Mehmet knows my daughter-in-law is Turkish and my grandson, Albert Ege, is Turkish. And so I'm showing pictures of my baby pictures here of my grandson. And they said, well, you have to come up and say something. So I'm happy to be part of the family. It's critical that we have press freedom around the world. Tomorrow we'll be talking some more about the cases of Austin Tice and Evan and Alsu held in Russian prisons. Last night we had the James Foley Awards banquet and had a chance to hear from the Foley Foundation about world press freedom and ways to really protect journalists who are in harm's way or being held captive. And that is the issue. It is what to do about this idea of using reporters as pawns. Anyway, I just came to say hello and welcome you, and thank you so much for being here. Have a good session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for joining and supporting us this event today. So we would like to, show a presentation, a video presentation that really talks about the persecuted journalists in Turkey and how is the current situation in terms of press freedom. Let's watch this very short presentation, then we will move on to our panel discussion.
Türkiye demokrasisini bir kez daha karanlığa gömen bu
Anayasanın
sansür uygulaması
30. maddesinin kolluk gücüyle askıya alındığı bir gün.
Free press is under attack in Turkey. Journalism is not free in Turkey. Journalists are not safe in Turkey. Turkey's press is marred by government interference, creating a dangerous environment for critical journalists. Turkey ranks 165th among 180 countries in the Freedom of the Press Index. Over 200 media outlets have been closed since 2016 coup attempt, including print and visual media. Turkey ranks among the highest in terms of the number of journalists in prison, along with countries such as China and North Korea. Among hundreds of media and press professionals detained at some point, Mehmet Baransu has been behind bars since 2015. Nazlı İlçak was jailed for more than 3 years. Hidayet Karaka has been jailed since 2014. Ahmet Altan was jailed for more than 5 years in total. Eisner Paraldak was jailed for 6 years. According to MLSA report as of today, at least 25 journalists and media workers are still in prison in Turkey. Detentions of journalists abusing the anti-terrorism laws lead to self-censorship, hindering reporting on controversial issues. Women journalists, especially Kurds, frequently face harassment, detention, and imprisonment. Critical journalists face widespread discrimination and oppression, with press credential revocations, online censorship on corruption, and legal backlash for reporting on sensitive issues, highlighting a systemic problem of impunity. Erdogan intensifies journalist suppression to divert attention from economic woes, bolstering political support amid corruption allegations. Turkey's government uses sanctions and access restrictions to silence the media. In 2023 alone, the broadcasting regulator imposed 570 sanctions on TV stations. During deadly earthquakes, Twitter access was restricted, hindering communication during emergencies and resulting in more casualties that could have been prevented. A suppressed press fuels provocation and polarization, with pro-government media spreading hate and manipulating narratives, breeding fear and compliance. Detainments and torture instill suspicion and unrest in order to silence not only media, but also the society. State-affiliated journalists spin false tales of prosperity, masking our true struggles. Free press is the vanguard of truth. This is why the release of imprisoned journalists is imperative. The public deserves truth, not narratives propagated by online personalities. Free press is under attack in Turkey. Journalism is not free in Turkey. Journalists are not safe in Turkey. Stand with us to defend.
Yeah, it is very saddening for all Turkish Americans that journalism is not free, journalists are not free in Turkey. So we would like Turkey to become a democratic country that upholds press freedom and all fundamental freedoms. I would like to just bring your attention to the photo exhibition that we have. Unfortunately, in Turkey, there are 25 to 5 journalists who are still in prison. And they are from different walks of life. They are not only from one group, but they are from different, like Turkish, Kurdish, Armenian, and many others. So I would like you to just, walk through during the break. And also I would like to let you know that we have 2 reports. One of them is the Turkish Journalists in Exile. You can get a copy at the table. And also we have the list of journalists that are still in prison. You can get a copy with you. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for panel 1. Hoon Kim is currently serving as the senior correspondent and an assignment editor at the Global Strat View. Since 2023, he has been covering the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Congress, focusing on issues pertaining to East and South Asian affairs, along with other global topics. He has frequently provided analysis on regional security issues and held several events related to political developments of Asia, Latin America, and the Indo-Pacific. He is also currently serving as the White House correspondent for the Global Strat View. Please join me in welcoming Hoon Kim.
Well, thank you everybody for coming here today in this very historic and important occasion, and thank you, Mehmet, for the kind introduction. You might be wondering why I'm wearing a mask today. I'm just recovering from a nasty flu, and I didn't want to terrorize any of my panelists or any of you today, especially on this important occasion. So I thank you for your understanding in advance. Now, before we get onto our speakers today, just like to share that on behalf of all of the Korean journalists, being a Korean American, I think it's very important for me to say today here that in 1950, a very large contingent of Turkish soldiers came to South Korea in conjunction with all of the United Nations forces led by the United States and helped secure the freedom of my native homeland. And since then, the Turkish people and the Korean people have become what we call an endless, we have formed this thing called an endless brotherhood. And brotherhood, in a sense to us, represents a few things. It represents standing with each other in the good times and standing with each other in tough and challenging times. And so being a journalist, I am more than proud and honored to be standing with all of our Turkish brothers and sisters, and along with everybody else from the region, and in living out this brotherhood in the challenging times. So thank you so much for this honor of having me here. And so with that, I would like to quickly introduce our speakers today. We first have Mr. Abdulhamit Bilici. He's a former editor-in-chief of Zaman newspaper, and he will be talking about how Erdogan choked off the media to submission. And Mr. Abdulhamit Bilici is the former editor-in-chief of now closed Zaman newspaper, and he was also the chief executive officer of its English language version, today's Zaman. Mr. Bilici was the general director of a Cihan news agency and the editor of the Aksiyon weekly magazine. He has a master's degree from the Department of Economics at Istanbul University and has an MBA degree from the Faculty of Management at Faith University. Abdulhamit Bilici has been living in exile as a journalist in the USA after a failed coup attempt in Türkiye. Mr. Bilici is an expert on Turkish politics and continues his journalism career by writing his freelance articles from various media outlets. Next, we have Miss Arbana Xharra. She's an investigative journalist, and she'll be discussing democracy, freedom, and the freedom of expression. Miss Arbana Xharra is an investigative journalist with an international recognition. She is an expert on religious radicalization. She has authored a series of investigative reports since 2012 on religious extremists and Turkey's Islamic agenda, operating in the Balkans and the European Union. And her articles are joined in numerous world media outlets and prominent journals, such as Sage Johns Hopkins. Arbana won numerous awards for her reporting and was a 2015 recipient of the International Woman of Courage Award from the U.S. State Department. She has been featured on a variety of television news networks as an expert on religious freedom and human rights, and she has also developed campaigns and strategies on public relations and communications for various think tanks and nonprofit organizations in the USA. And we have two more colleagues in the back. Mr. Ergun Babahan, I promise I'll get through this as quickly as possible, who's a journalist, commentator, and a former editor-in-chief of the Sabah newspaper. He'll be discussing the current state of press freedom and threats journalists face in Türkiye and abroad. Mr. Ergun Babahan graduated from Istanbul University Law Faculty in 1981 after a short time working as a lawyer. He stepped into journalism as a reporter in Yeni Asir. He worked as an editor, managing editor, and editor-in-chief in Söz, Hurriyet, Sabah, and Yeni Binyo newspapers, respectively. He joined the John Knight Professional Program at Stanford University with the German Marshall Fund Scholarship in 1988 and the American Foreign Policy Process Program at the University of Maryland in 1990 with a Ford Foundation Scholarship. He currently lives in Montreal, Canada. And last but not least, we have Mr. Kani Xulam. He's the president of the American Kurdish Network, raising the voices of the voiceless in Türkiye. Kani Xulam is a native of Kurdistan. He studied in international relations at the University of Toronto, holds a BA in history of the University of California in Santa Barbara, and MA in international service program at American University. At the University of Toronto, he represented Kurdistan at the Model United Nations, which passed a non-binding resolution recognizing the right of the Kurdish people to self-determination. At the University of California, Santa Barbara, he was a part of the group of peace activists who protested the first Gulf War by making a part in a sit-in at the Chancellor's office in January 1991. He was arrested. Mr. Xulam pled not guilty, defended himself, and was sentenced to 18 hours of community service to a plant saplings in Santa Barbara. Finally, in 1993, at the urging of Kurdish community leaders in America, he left his family business in Santa Barbara to establish the American Kurdish Information Network in the nation's capital. Akın is a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering Kurdish-American understanding and friendship, and in his capacity as Akın's director, Mr. Xulam has worked closely with the members of the U.S. Congress and their staff to seek freedom of the Kurdish parliamentarians imprisoned in Turkey, with a particular focus in the case of Leyla Zana. And with that, I'd like to invite you to please give a hand to all of our panelists today. Thank you so much. So with following that, I would like to ask each panelist to please give your introductory remarks, 5 to 8 minutes, and after that we will go into our program discussion. So, Mr. Abdulhamit.
Thank you very much, Mr. So. And I'd like to thank the Journalists and Writers Foundation and the AST, Silenced Turkey, the advocates of Silenced Turkey, for giving us the opportunity. And it's very big honor to be here at this heart of Washington, at the National Press Club. We are talking about, at a very critical time, this World Press Freedom Day. So lots of things to be said, but I just like to summarize some of the ideas, and we can continue in the discussion session. So the journalists are supposed to be the voice of the voiceless, to be the voice of the oppressed, to be the voice of the persecuted. This is one of the main functions of journalists. So what we are talking now, those voices being silenced. So when we talk about a journalist to be in jail, or a media organization to be shut down, or a journalist to be exiled, we need to think that there is a big number of people, a big population, which lost its voice. So it is not the rights of the journalist personally at question. So it's a society is losing their most important advocates. So this is what we are witnessing in case of Turkey and in any country that the media is suppressed or persecuted. So this is my story will tell the Turkey's story of the media persecution. I am the editor-in-chief. I was the editor-in-chief of the largest Turkish newspaper until 2016, March 2016. On 4th of March, that newspaper was occupied brutally, and then I was kicked out of the newspaper, fired, and the newspaper was a critical newspaper, but it was converted into a mouthpiece in 24 hours because they hired a new mouthpiece editor. So this newspaper had a circulation at the time of that tragic event over 700,000 per day. So we had more than 80 columnists, more than 200 reporters working for us from Turkey's provinces and from around the world, from more than 80 countries. And with the families combined, it is around 5,000 people, more than 5,000. So this is just one of the newspapers that was silenced because there were 200 of them. News agencies, TV stations, radio stations, many media. So when you combine them, so then we can understand what does that mean, that in the World Press Freedom Index, Turkey is ranking 165 out of 180 countries. So now in Turkey, while we are speaking in this free country, in very prestigious platform of National Press Club, we have colleagues in Turkey. In the list that I have, the list varies from organization to organization, but now, as I am speaking here, we have at least 25 journalists in jail. So one of them was Mehmet Kamış, whom I worked together over 20 years. He was my editor while I was working in Aksiyon. He was deputy editor-in-chief of Zaman newspaper. So we had memories of nice journalism and lots of human stories that you can imagine. Now he is in jail in Silivri. And today there was a court case. The judge decided to continue his detention. And there is no allegation other than he being a journalist. So the stories are a lot, but I like to highlight some of them. Mehmet Kamış is one of the recent journalists that was arrested and in jail. And a small note, a group of journalists were arrested together with him, and there was court case, and the Erdogan's court asked for lifetime imprisonment. Like Ahmet Altan, Nazlı Ilıcak, Yakup Şimşek were in the subjects of the same case. And do you know what happened to those cases? They are released from jail, and the court case stopped. They got there is nothing. But despite that fact, now they are still keeping Mehmet Kamış in jail. And this is Alaaddin Kaya, who is a founder of our newspaper. And now, while we are speaking here, he stays in such a cell, such a prison cell, since 2017. And he is 74 years old and has lots of problems, health problems. And this is one of our columnists, Ali Ünal, who has nothing than to be a great columnist for our newspaper, and who translated Quran, Holy Book, into English and Turkish. So very well known, respected, and nothing to do with anything criminal. And this is a Kurdish journalist, Ziya Ataman, in jail and got sentenced for 14 years. And again, with the allegations, silly allegations, has nothing to do with anything criminal. This is Mehmet Baransu, You saw it in the video as well. So he's in jail and has over 36 years of prison times. So the story continues, as I said, more than 25. But and the question to me was how that happened. You know, Turkey is a NATO country, NATO member, and it's trying to be a member of European Union and member of European Council already. So how that happened? So, I mean, if we say that this press persecution or the suppression of the press started with Erdogan, this will not be correct. So there is a long history of Turkey persecuting, trying to silence journalists, unfortunately. And it goes back to the early years of the Republic. So when we go to the early years of the Republic, we see that a republic founded after an independence war, fought by all the different parts of the society. The Kurdish, Turkish, Alawites, religious, liberal, atheist, whatever. But then turned into a republic by a segment of those different factions and had a kind of top-down elitist approach. According to that definition of this republic, some people were alienated. Like the conservative people, like the Kurds, like Alawites, so they did not find a space in this new definition of the republic. So that is the core conflict and tension that went through all more than 100 years. So with that conflict, you need to remember that there is a establishment, military, judiciary, and the state, we call state, and the people. And there is always a tension between those two. And the government sometimes is representing people, and state is representing the established ideology. So the media was given a role to play as a tool of this establishment. When it goes beyond that limits, there is the problem. You go to exile, you go to prison, or you are killed. You know, this persecution goes to 1920s, 1940s. So, for instance, in 1945, a newspaper was attacked, Tan newspaper. It was started by leftist journalists. So it is very similar to my newspaper being attacked in 2016. The same sequence of events. So, Erdogan, you know, when we come to the story after Erdogan, it's a long story, of course. I try to summarize. Erdogan acted as if he represents the people. You know, I mentioned the conflict, a tension between state and the people. So Erdogan portrayed himself as if he is acting in the name of people against the state, to democratize the state, to make state a law-abiding country, government. At that stage, my newspaper, I personally supported that Erdogan's effort. That not only me, but whole international media, from Le Monde to New York Times, from European Union to United States, we all liked together that Erdogan was helping Turkey to be a better democracy. But Erdogan, in my view, cheated us. Not me personally, but all of these people that supported and thought that this guy is the person that will bring Turkey into a democratic government. And media, he did this by taking control of the media. That was how he took the submission of the media. He played a lot of tactics, and some of them we missed. You know, when he was, for instance, transferring the ownership of Star Media Group or the Sabah Media Group, we thought that this was part of his effort to democratize Turkey, to make the state powerless, but the government, the people, powerful. But now, later, we realized that he started to use all these against democracy and against, in the way of not to bring Turkey to European Union, but to create a one-man rule. So we were part of a big community of supporters of democracy, in the name of democracy. So now we came to be persecuted by the same person who we were supporting to give us more freedoms, to make Turkey a better democracy, and maybe to make it a member of European Union. So this is a very tragic story, and we can continue in the sessions, in the discussion sessions. Thank you very much for your
Thank you, Hamid.
for attention. Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Arbana Xharra.
So I'm from Kosovo, and how many of you remember the war that started in 1999? I was 16, 17 at the time, and we were under the Serbian regime, so they caused genocide. 20,000 women were raped, and after the war, we were saved by the United States and EU allies. And after the war, I started working as a journalist because on my way to Albania with my family, 2 months after we stayed in the war, I was interviewed at the time by the journalist, and I realized the power of speaking for those who cannot speak. And I started writing after the war in Kosovo. We were building a new country, even though predominant Muslim, very pro-Western. We named our kids after Madeleine Albright and Tony Blair, and we were thankful and grateful. And what happened after the war, we had Saudis trying to influence our society. After the war, the poverty and a lot of problems. Of course, corrupted leaders, local leaders. So what happened, I started focusing on the first 10 years on corruption and not paying attention what is happening meantime, because we didn't know that something else will start causing us as a society problems and our cultural impact. So what happened? Turkey, Saudis in the beginning, and then Turkey with Erdogan, leading Erdogan, he started trying to spread influence, and he uses religion because he doesn't want to be questioned. So as Abdulhamit mentioned, so authoritarian regimes, they know what is the best way to get influence, and what is that they start helping people. They start becoming like a part of those who doesn't have voice. So they start offering free English and computer courses, and it started immediately after the war. No one was paying attention. Nothing happened over the night. I started writing about following the money. So it was religion, but he was corrupted. He was corrupted and corrupting other local leaders in Kosovo, in Albania, and in the Balkans. So someone will ask, why would Erdogan want Kosovo to spread influence in Kosovo and in the Balkans? Because even though he's a NATO member, we all know that how his relationship with EU and US are, and he became more close to Russia. And he's the only Turkey is the only NATO member that works against Euro-Atlantic agenda. He kills Kurds, and the other day he came and uses Palestinian cause as he cares for Palestinian, saying that we have to solve the problem, but you are killing Kurdish people, innocent people. So we have a leader who is trying to become a leader of the Muslim world. So he uses religion, he's a criminal. And what happened? I start talking and trying to raise awareness and not let this Islamic agenda influence our society. Today, I'm 6 years now here in exile. I moved here after I was brutally attacked. At the night that I was brutally attacked, I was speaking on live TV show about the mosques that Erdogan was building, about the money that he was not bringing in Kosovo through bank, but cash, how he was influencing our society. And I was just telling the truth. After many years and writings and publications, today, unfortunately, we have less journalists that are speaking up. And I understand my colleagues because it's tough. What happened in the past over 10 years? He influenced media. He influenced not just building mosques. You have the best students in the Pristina and the university that support his agenda. You had parliament members that support his agenda. So the whole issue was the cultural impact. not just the mosques, not just the religious road that he was using, but right now you have the parliament member who openly support Erdogan. The whole thing is that I don't know if you remember in 2018 when he was not allowed to organize pre-election campaign in Europe, Austria just didn't let him. And what he did, he came in the Balkans, he came in the Bosnia. So the whole issue, he wants the Balkans away from Europe. He wants to turn the whole generation against Western values. Today, I'm coming from Kosovo. I was saved by the United States. And you have all this youth who support Erdogan and support Putin at the same time. We have the same line of extremist groups who were a member of ISIS who support Erdogan. Now, some would say like, no, but he's not ISIS. But tell me something. How come the people that support ISIS, they support Erdogan? So, we had the journalists who were telling the truth that he was supporting this terrorist organization. So the whole thing is, we as a journalist, it's not easy. I know I'm talking here with these gentlemen that they come from Turkey, and I'm not from there. But as a female journalist in Kosovo, which has nothing to do, like I'm Albanian, I had a Turkish ambassador writing an open letter against me and asking for the government to arrest me. Like, I can imagine what happened, and we know, we have numbers what is happening in Turkey. But it's very sad because it's corruption also linked to him, and it's very sad because today in this world where we have hundreds of journalists indicted, and we have the wars all across the world, having this criminal using religion, and he achieved to brainwash the younger generation that he is a Muslim leader. So we have to expose him. How are we going to expose him? By following his money, telling that he comes up and he talks with holding Quran, just not to be questioned. I know for me right now, it's much easier to speak up from United States where I live with my kids, but it's very hard for journalists in Turkey, for journalists in other parts of the world when you are not safe, when you don't know what is going to happen. But hopefully what happened in Istanbul and in Ankara, hopefully the only way is to get rid of this authoritarian criminals that we are running the states. The only way is to save this society by trying and voting against him. I know that they want to silence journalists because this way the people will not know the truth. So that's why it's very important for us, even though we are not there, to continue talking and speaking of the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Arbana. Next, we have Mr. Ergun.
I am here today because I was a friend of Abdulhamit and Kani. I'm a liberal kind of journalist. I was with them when Erdogan suppressed the Hizmet movement or Kurds. So I found myself in Canada 8 years ago. In 1988, I was in Stanford, Palo Alto. I was going to an Iranian restaurant. There was a middle-aged man running an Iranian restaurant. He was a successful businessman in Tehran and had to leave Iran, come to California and started this small restaurant, but successful one. I still used to see the sorrow in his eyes. He used to miss his country, etc. And the day I left Turkey with a ferry, I suddenly remembered him. I knew that I was never going to back to Turkey again. It was the last day. We all became exiled, but we were still lucky because we are not in prison. Our families are with us. But still, our wives or kids' passports also confiscated. We are luckier in Canada because we get PR card, Canadian version of it, easily than the United States. And we became citizen very quickly. It wasn't a problem in Canada. Canada is the same system but with nicer government, especially against immigrants. So we live now in Canada and free to travel, unlike most of my friends here. That's the biggest problem for journalists exiled in the United States. There's movement of travel, right of travel is restricted, unfortunately. Turkey's problem starts with its foundation. Its foundation of Turkey is Armenian genocide, cooperation with the gangs against a people raping, killing, murdering, exiling more than 1 million people. So it's the idea of the state. When state feels itself threatened by Jamaat or Kurds, they go back to the same methods, cooperate with gangs, and just destroy those people who deem to their enemy. Jamaat is a newcomer into this fault, and they have been living this since late 17th centuries, Kurds. And suppression and torture. Just last week, 6 young Turkish journalists were arrested, subjected to humiliation by naked body search, and even the so-called Turkish opposition media didn't write anything about them. That's the reality. If you exist in Turkey, you move with the government or the state, especially state. Turkish people, or especially journalists, does not care much about who is in power, but state policies. So whenever they start criticizing Erdogan policies, they say first FETÖ, then PKK terrorists, then they start criticizing Erdogan's courts or economic policies, anti-democratic acts, etc. What we have as an exiled journalist today is the world's reality today. The world is tired of with Mr. Erdogan and Turkey. Biden even didn't want him to come to Washington and visit him in the White House. They have Gaza problem, Ukrainian war, China threat, Russia, etc. And they don't mind what's going on in Turkey, the suppression, corruption, whatever it is, as long as Erdogan keeps this 4 or 5 million Syrians and a few 100,000 Afghans in its borders and don't let them go to Europe and destabilize European mainland, they are happy. Also being a part of NATO, some kind of cooperation in the Black Sea is good enough to turn their heads away. United States case is different than Europe because especially towards Kurds. If you are a Kurdish journalist, and I know it very closely from my friends in Brussels, it's nearly impossible to get a visa, come to United States and work as a Kurdish journalist. United States doesn't allow them. And if you are a Kurdish person persecuted by Erdogan regime, if you come to United States, you will be probably arrested immediately and extradited to Turkey. It's more difficult for Kurdish people. And that's why Erdogan follows Gazze-like policies in northern Syria, what we call Rojava, bombing electric centrals, hospitals, and attacking Kurdish people every day in Syria and northern Iraqi Kurdistan. Nobody cares about it. Nobody writes in the Western media. Those people in Syria especially lead the war against ISIS and lost more than 10,000 people shoulder with American soldiers. And neither American administration nor American media pays attention to them. That's the biggest threat because Kurdish policy is going to determine the future of Turkish Republic. If it's going to be a democratic, law-respecting country, they need to find this problem in a democratic and lawful way. If we cannot solve it, we will have another Erdogan-like regime. A few years will be kind of lawful, but when they have the power in their control completely, they will get corrupt and unlawful. That's the story of Turkey. After İnönü, we had Menderes, 4 years was perfect, then military coup. Then Demirel came, 4 years were also great. Then 1971, another military coup. Then coalition's government, 1980, we had the same military coup. And unfortunately, we have some colleagues who are in Europe exiled twice, before 1980 or after 1980 and after 2015. People suffered twice. How can we solve it? It's difficult, but if we can manage with Kurds, Hizmet, or some liberal-minded journalists, create a platform, bringing first the leaders of opinion together and talking to each other more often, writing about the issues and trying to find solutions. Maybe we can have a hope, but otherwise, I see the near and long-term future of Turkey is very dark. Thank you.
Thank you, Ergun. Our last, but definitely not the least speaker, Mr. Kani. Xulam?
Honoring Tülay Açıkkollu and Medine Öncel. We're here to honor and remember the journalists of Turkey today. Most of us happen to be Turks or Kurds or their friends who are alarmed that our reporter friends are persecuted in Istanbul and Ankara, or Van and Diyarbakır, or as we Kurds fondly call it, Ahmet. Let me first state the obvious. I am not a journalist. I am, however, an avid consumer of news. The reporters do for their societies what doctors do for their patients. They help them live healthy lives. They are often targeted, but they are essential for democracies. Thomas Jefferson knew this and stated it in a letter to a friend, Edward Carrington, as early as 1787. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. America, those of us who have sought refuge on its shores would be quick to note, has both a government and a free press. We gather here with impunity and share our views with one another without worrying whether we would be visited by the police later tonight or in the future. Can we say the same about Turkey, the country of our births? Turkey has a government for sure, but does it have a free press? Americans living in France don't hold panel discussions with titles Media in Turmoil. Turks or Kurds living in the United States do. Perhaps one day the Middle East will be blessed with the likes of Thomas Jefferson as well, and we too will enjoy a free press. For now, though, our work is cut out for us. We have to talk about the unfree press, the preoccupation of leaders like Erdogan, Putin, and Modi. Their handiwork is disturbing, but like the bitter medicine that doctor might prescribe to her patient, we have to take it, meaning thoroughly study it, enable our peoples to separate the wheat from the chaff, and wait for the emergence of healthy societies in our corner of the world as well. This is what happened in America after its liberation from the Great Britain. It can happen in Turkey too, after its emancipation from its dictators. I have been asked to address the subject of raising the voices of the voiceless. I have chosen the stories of Tulay Açıkkollu and Medine Öncel. Tulay is a Turk from Konya. Medine was a Kurd from Diyarbakır. Tulay lives in exile now. Medine jumped to her death from the 7th floor of her apartment on July 14, 1999. Why is Tulay in exile? Why did Medine commit suicide? Tulay Açıkkollu would have been happier if she had never become a news item in 2016. She was living in Istanbul, minding her own business and raising her 2 children with the support of her husband, Gökhan Açıkkollu. Tulay and Gökhan were teachers. Fatih and Zeynep, their children, were students. Then there was a political earthquake in Turkey on July 15, 2016. 8 days later, Gökhan Açıkkollu was arrested. 2 weeks later, his lifeless and tortured body was handed over to his wife, Tulay Açıkkollu, like a lost luggage. We know more about the Açıkkollus because Mina Leyla has written a book about them. We learned that they were members of the Hizmet movement, the brainchild of Fethullah Gülen. Hizmet means service in Turkish. Tulay was one of its ardent followers. Here, I can't help but remember my Dr. King. Tulay makes no references to him, but speaks his language. She calls herself and her fellow Hizmet members the hoarders of books, the guardians of love, the disciples of tolerance. Tulay is not among us, but perhaps she will read this testimonial of mine and reflect on my association of her name with Dr. King. She would, I am sure of it, benefit from knowing the American cleric. He too was a great believer of the word service. Here is what he said of it. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make it your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. America is a better place because of these prophetic words. Dr. King, of course, knew how to make his subjects agree with his verbs. Blessed with a baritone voice, radiating unconditional love, he dared to oppose America's war in Vietnam and didn't shy away from declaring his country the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. While America had its Vietnam, Turkey has its Kurdistan. Tulay and I share a common language, Turkish. A few years ago, I had seen a video in which she described the wrongs she had endured as a member of Hizmet movement. Her pain was palpable. I made room for her in my heart and kept an eye on her and her children in the news. Last week, I had a chance to spend 2 days reading Mina Leyla's account of the Açıkkollus. I know quite a bit about the Turks. I also know persecuted people notice other persecuted people. I was curious to find out if she would say anything about my hapless people, the Kurds. Would she, for example, say or imply the Kurds are a people apart and should enjoy the political rights the way, for example, the Scots in Scotland do, right next to their English neighbors in England? Would she, for example, say or imply real love is indivisible, tolerance implies universality, violence is a treason to civilization, and if I ever run into her in person, would she consider joining me in urging her beloved leader Fethullah Gülen to issue a statement denouncing the war in Kurdistan the way Dr. King did in Vietnam? Yes, I would. Violence is like an earthquake. It has no winners, only losers. For 40 years now, Kurds and Turks have been fighting one another while the children of other nations have invented smartphones, edited genes, crafted artificial intelligence, and dared to look for signs of life in distant planets. Why aren't our youth crazy about science or its parent freedom, but are easy prey to those who play with us the way a cat plays with a mouse? One woman who never held a smartphone in her hands, or heard of gene editing in America or France, or thought of robots that could think, or imagined visiting other planets, was Medine Öncel. The English-speaking world owes Amberin Zaman, an exiled Turkish journalist, a debt of gratitude for sharing her story with the world. I first read about Medine back in 1999. Like Tülay's story, it left an indelible impression on me. If I were a novelist, I might have captured her world in print, describing her pain and that of the Kurds, barred from speaking their Kurdish language by misguided leaders of the Turks, from Atatürk to Erdogan. Medine Öncel was born in Diyarbakir. The year of her birth, 1978, would also coincide with the birth of a political party, Partiya Karkerin Kurdistan, the PKK. In 1975, America took a beating in Vietnam. The PKK, thinking it could do the same in Western Asia, attacked Turkey in 1984. Not all trees bear fruit, and the PKK's plans to liberate Kurdistan have come up empty. Its leader, Abdullah Öcalan, was forced to abandon his sanctuary in Damascus in 1998. By then, Medine was in her 20s. Her mind was dedicated to Öcalan. For a living, she laid bricks. There is a passage in Mina Leyla's book in which Tülay entertains a hypothetical. What if she were given a choice, that she could go back to her pre-July 15, 2016 life on a condition that she forgoes her relationship with the Hizmet movement? Would she take it? No, she says, I would never accept that offer. From what we know of Medine Öncel, she had a similar relationship with the PKK and its leader, Mr. Öcalan. Apparently, when Mr. Öcalan was forced to seek refuge outside of Syria, Medine and her friends undertook a hunger strike in November 1998 in Diyarbakir. It was a futile gesture. It was like Don Quixote fighting the windmills. For her troubles, she was arrested and horribly tortured. What else did the police do to her? We don't know, is a good answer. After her death, Devran Öncel, her sister, told Amberin Zaman, Medine always said she would kill herself rather than go through the same hell again. But the fiends of hell on the payroll of the Turkish government would not leave her alone. They paid her another visit at 3 a.m. on the morning of July 14, 1999. They said they had come to take the sisters in for questioning. Devran went to her room to get dressed. Medine went to the window and jumped to her death. I started my talk with a quote from Thomas Jefferson, America's first Secretary of State. I'd like to end it with another quote, this time with that of Condoleezza Rice. It's 66th. After taking her oath of office, she went on a tour of foreign capitals in February of 2005 and paid a visit to Abdullah Gül, her Turkish counterpart in Ankara. Years later, she wrote her memoirs and told her readers what she thought of her colleague. Mr. Gül welcomed me at the airport. In the car ride to my hotel, we talked about the issues confronting our respective countries. The Kurds came up too. Mr. Gül told me, unlike the previous governments, we intend to treat them better. We will, quote, awaken the Turkish identity, end of quote, of our Kurds. What does it mean to awaken the Turkish identity of the Kurds? Is that like Moscow trying to awaken the Russian identity of the Ukrainians? Or like when Berlin tried to awaken the German identity of the French from 1870 to 1945 through 3 cataclysmic wars? If you're rolling your eyes here, wait until I share with you what Miss Rice told him in response. Quote, I saw nothing to dislike about my colleagues' views, and that holds to this day. There was, of course, a lot to dislike about Mr. Gül's absurd belief in that car ride. What if instead of celebrating their common ignorance, Miss Rice had echoed her famous predecessor and said something like, a free press is a better medication to the Kurdish question than all the weapons of the world put together. Such a course of action would have been too late for Medine Öncel, but it might have exposed Erdogan for what he is, a menace to the free societies, and allowed Tülay and her family to live unmolested lives in Turkey today. Notwithstanding Rais, Gül, Erdogan, Putin, and Modi, we have to stand for free press. The happiness of humanity depends on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Now, before we get into our discussion, I would like to set down some very quick rules regarding the Q&A. And if you do have a question, we require in this event and along with all of our events at the National Press Club to please write down your questions on the note cards that are in your seats, or it will be distributed, I'm sure, to all of our attendees. And once you have the question, it will be collected. And as we do the discussions, we will present your questions forward. So if you can please work on that right now as we go into our discussions, will be much appreciated. Thank you so much. Now, thank you to all of you for sharing your message. I think the first thing that really comes into mind is the idea that dictators or authoritarian regimes never ever do anything unless they test it out to their own people. So as Abdulhamit, you and Ergun made a very interesting point that this problem that we see with freedom of press and everything else that you've discussed didn't just start from Erdogan. It started from its foundations. And so if you can talk a little bit more about that and enlighten us as to why that is important for us to understand, and what impact do you think it'll have further if the current regime-like practices in the Turkish government resumes for the future?
Yeah, I say so because I see that there is a lack of understanding of democracy. So we have a republic, and the Turkish people are proud of having a republic after the Ottoman Empire were dissolved at the end of the First World War. But the problem, the missing part was not to be able to democratize that republic. So in terms of having a republic, even Saddam had a republic, Gaddafi had a republic. So having a republic is not a big deal in modern times. You need to be able to democratize it. So when you come to democratize it, you need to have check and balance system, So you need to have judiciary independent, parliament powerful to check, to control the power of the executive, and then very importantly to have the free press to control, to check all of those different powers. So unfortunately I think this is not a problem related to only Turkey, but to all developing countries, particularly to Middle East, that we don't have a good understanding of the chemistry of the power. So without understanding it, it is not possible to cure it. So what is the chemistry of power? It corrupts. When you get very powerful, you get more corrupt. So you need to have some mechanisms that will limit that power and that limit that corruption. So the media is for this, independent judiciary is for this, and the parliament is for this. But if you don't have those, so you have the corruption, and the powerful leaders, when they get corrupted, they hate two institutions. First, judiciary, independent judiciary, and then the free media. So they see it as an enemy, and they like to destroy it, and they destroyed in Turkey. The destruction of free media. Turkey was not a paradise before Erdogan, of course, but Erdogan destroyed free media after 2013 corruption scandal, when we learned that there is huge corruption, a Turkish-Iranian businessman paying bribes to the ministers, their sons, and Erdogan himself. So when we learned that, when Turkish media, when Turkish public and whole world learned that, Erdogan had two options: to go to the court, respond to the allegations, answer to the allegations. If the allegations are not true, continue governing the country. If the allegations are, true, which is the case, there are lots of thousands of evidences that these allegations are true, then to be in the jail, as a criminal. But what Erdogan did, Erdogan picked the last resort option, which destroying judiciary and destroying free media. So this is the reason why now Turkey is ranking 165 out of 180 countries in World Freedom Index. And also, very similar to that, in the Rule of Law Index, there is also another index in the world, it is 116 out of 140 countries. So which means you don't have free press, you don't have independent judiciary, and there is also one element on top of that. Erdogan flipped the judiciary in his as a tool, and now all the persecution is happening with a court decision.
Right.
So there are judges now. For instance, when I have an arrest warrant against me, and under it is signed by a judge. They shut down my newspaper with a court decision. Those 25 journalists in jail, these are, seemingly everything is legal, but it is not just. So this is the system that Erdogan created, and unfortunately, it may be a model for other countries, which is dangerous.
Right. So with that point, Arbana, you touched on this point earlier, how the practice of limiting free media and direct threats against journalists that's happening in Turkey, it seems to be importing into other countries like Kosovo. So if you can maybe touch upon that a little bit.
You mentioned a very important point when now other leaders that are trying to become same as Erdogan. They are friends and they see that this works. It's all about control. And the thing is that why do we have the silence of the Western leaders? This is the issue. So we had, I'm taking as an example, the Albanian prime minister who he came with a video message asked from Turkish people to vote for Erdogan. And he's becoming like him. Why I'm saying this is the other day, one of the journalists asked him a question during the conference that he didn't like, and he pushed her. Like, they are going that way. So what I'm trying to say is that they are the same mechanisms that they do, like take control over the judiciary, media, and then if they cannot immediately arrest journalists, what they do, they try to lose our credibility. But what happened in Kosovo, for example, a lot of media are sponsored by Turkish money, a lot of imams who have influence. Now, I was in the court with this imam for over 8 years, and I didn't know what is going to happen because every day we have more judge and prosecutors who on Friday, they close the office, they go to pray, and they are Erdogan supporters. So what I'm going to expect, that it's very important, since we are journalists here, and to mention that we need also international support. We need international voices to speak for us. What is happening in Turkey, what is happening in other countries, because it's not just Middle East, Turkey. We have the Western, we have the EU countries where journalists are being indicted. And are we going that way? Is this becoming a normality for journalists to be threatened and nothing like? I was brutally attacked. And to this day, since May 2017, they didn't do anything. When I realized that the state doesn't want to solve this issue was when I find out the prosecutor that was named to deal with my case, he was dealing with traffic tickets. So it was obvious that they wanted to hide who attacked me. So this is very important for us, especially on the countries why Erdogan is trying to have more friends, because this way he's going to increase his influence and the power also in other countries. And of course, the Kosovo was the perfect environment. The Balkans, there's still problems, poverty. So it's very easy when Kosovo was until January 2024 isolated. People couldn't travel, and it's so easy to brainwash youth, and they think that Erdogan is the best. Media are not speaking up against him. So now they are 25 years after the war. How are you gonna fight generations that support this ideology? So this is the problem. After fearing or silencing journalists, now you have people that support his voice in the main institution. So yeah, this is what in the beginning when I started writing, of course, they're going to say to me, you're Islamophobe, because this way no one will hear what I was saying. But who helped me during my journey as a journalist? Liberal imams who knew that they were the first to be attacked from the extremist groups. So yeah, they still run fake news against me just because whatever I write, they're going to say, just don't listen to her because she's against Islam. That's why I mentioned that he uses religion to increase his influence. So just we have to find the way how to expose his very dangerous agenda.
Thank you, Arbana. Now, to Ergun and Kani, you know, both. So one idea that comes into mind when we were hearing your speeches is there seems to be a weaponization of apathy by these totalitarian government. I mean, Ergun, you rightfully pointed out that nobody cares about the Kurds, the Iraqi Kurdistan, for example. And then Kani, you've also mentioned that, look, all these horrific things are happening to my colleague, but there's not one mention of it in the media as it should be. So if you can just touch upon the weaponization of apathy, and as Arbana also pointed out, the lack of action as a result of that. What type of, I mean, another question that comes into mind is, what is the future implications of this if this were to continue for the next 5 to 10 years?
When you decide to commit a genocide or a terrible policy against a group of people or as a people like Kurds, you first dehumanize them, terrorists. Like until Erdogan, we didn't have these crazy stories about Jews killing kids and drinking their blood. Now we read that kind of stories or watching programs on government media about how Jewish people killed children and eat their blood in New York or some synagogues in DC, I don't remember. So they did it towards Jamaat, and they've been doing this Kurds since the beginning. But it all started with Armenians. We didn't face it up. And it's a normal way of act for the state. I was in the university in 1978, my first year, and we were the leftist group, and there were the fascist group, and they had the main entrance, and we used to go to side gates. And on March 16, 1978, police forced us to go through the main gate. And there were some police, military members of the counter-guerrilla department and some fascists, and they bombed us. 7 students were killed, more than hundreds were injured. And we knew who they were. And 2 of them became parliamentarian from fascist party in Turkey. That's the way how the states work in Turkey. Erdogan is an object of hate, but he's not alone. There is a very powerful founding state mentality in works here. And according to Xharra, it's Talat Pasha in 1915 created this opinion and started this policy against all kinds of threats for the state.
Yeah. In 1987, an Albanian soldier in Kosovo apparently mentally was disturbed, killed 3 Serbian soldiers. And Slobodan Milosevic was not a leader at the highest levels, but he uttered a phrase, something to the effect, "This is a blessing from God." And we know the rest of the story. When on July 15, 2016, the same thing happened when a political earthquake happened in Turkey, when Erdogan said, "This is a blessing in disguise," I immediately connected the two. Milosevic ended up going to Hague, and international community forced him to pay a price for his crimes. So far, there isn't a will to do the same to Erdogan. But Middle East is very slippery. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 years we could have a completely different scenario. One thing else I'll add, America was born with an original sin, slavery, and it took the Civil War to end that with the help of people like Abraham Lincoln. Turkey was born with an original sin, and as Ergun points out, the Armenian genocide. If Turkey comes to terms with its past, its people, its neighbors have the potential to overcome these problems. We could have a brighter future. We don't need to be in each other's hairs. We don't need to, trip each other. We could also, as I say, try to invent smartphones.
Well, with that, I think the other question that would come into our mind, and also from some of our audience members, is, there is a change that's going to happen in Turkey politically. Now, some are saying that, well, this may open up an opportunity for us to have a quote-unquote a better government, but many more are speculating that it's going to be a continuation of Erdogan-like practices for Turkey. I wanted each of you to maybe comment on that, and just under maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, I see the last election as a positive development. I mean, it gave me, and not just to me, but the whole world, that Turkey is not becoming another dictatorship like Iraq or Libya or Russia. A couple of months ago, we had an election in Russia, and Putin got 85% of the support. So Turkey, it gives the message that Turkey is not going in that direction, which is a very important thing for whole world public opinion, because there was, since 2016, we have been in those kind of platforms and telling the persecution, the story of the human rights tragedy. So after one level, Turkey could be ignored, They would say, Turkey, yes, we accept it as part of many authoritarian dictatorships. So what is the problem if we have Turkey turning to be another Syria? So that was the danger for Turkish people. And with this election result, the source of it may be not the desire to have a full-fledged democracy or full-fledged press freedom, etc. Maybe it is mostly economically motivated, because especially the pensioners gave their message to Erdogan that they are not able to survive.
Right.
So that may be the main motivation, maybe that, but at least it created a room that the opposition can be motivated, can be encouraged to do some better things. But we have the deeper problem is the mentality that all of us underlined here. That is, without changing the mentality, if you don't understand democracy, if you don't understand the gist of it, it doesn't matter whether the name of the leader is Erdogan or Kılıçdaroğlu or Özgür Özel, So there are now lots of journalists in jail, lots of judges in jail, lawyers in jail, politicians in jail. So I look at the opposition's approach to that. Do they care?
Right.
So if they don't care, if they come to the power, if they replace Erdogan, what will change? Yeah, Erdogan's destruction is beyond imagination. He destroyed everything.
Right.
We can go to, Turkey was not rule of law country, but at least there were some laws were respected. So maybe we can go back to that earlier stage, that there are some state institutions, relative freedom, some kind of democracy, but without that change in different sections of society, including opposition, we couldn't be South Korea. this is, I think it is possible.
Right.
Your country is a good example, economically developed and a democracy, and Turkey could be one, but we need to have a bigger, deeper changes in our minds, all sections of society.
So Arbana, as Abdulhamit mentioned, there is a bit of an aspiration for Turkey, at least for the people of Turkey or those outside of Turkey, for Turkey to become a functioning democracy. Now, from your perspective, and I would even call it, may I even dare say, the Balkan perspective, what impact would that have in that part of the world and particularly in the West in general?
Yeah, so the perspective that we see from outside Turkey, and especially me coming from the country that we've built a new institution in the past 25 years. So the process of having a massive wake-up of people, first of all, and then the lessons that the opposition parties will learn. So we have the government political party coalition now that for 20 years they were on the street bragging against the corruption. And they keep the power, and they have their own people corrupted. There is nepotism. The thing in Turkey right now, what is very interesting, so I've been expanding my network, especially after I come here. Turks in Europe support Erdogan, while we have diaspora in the United States who are against Erdogan. And you have a huge influence of diaspora in the election. When you have silenced Turkey, you don't have media right now to write that, listen, Erdogan, as I mentioned at the beginning, is using the war in Gaza, but there are no media there, as Zaman was, to just write that, yes, Erdogan is talking about the Palestinian, but he does business with Israel, and they have increased before, exactly, today. But until today, even when the war started on October 7th of last year, so how they are going to find out people that vote for him, see that he cares about Palestinians, he cares about the war. There is no media, there is no one to show who Erdogan is. And that's why it's very problematic to have a massive wake up, because who are his voters? Who are his supporters? How is he investing on his personal image? Like, we know not just Erdogan, also other leaders who's been going through what he's going, and he have seen that his popularity is decreasing, and he needs something. He needs something to come up. So here is the thing, how we are going, and as I said, also for Kosovo was the diaspora sometimes have impact. And for the huge diaspora, the Turkish diaspora in Europe, I was honestly surprised to hear and to see writings of them in support of Erdogan and living in Western countries and seeing what is happening in Turkey and saying that he is a great leader. So I am not that optimistic that soon he is going to be kicked out. As I said, also, he is a NATO member who is committing crime, what he is doing in northern Syria with Kurds, and you have the silence EU, and also the Biden administration was, even though he didn't invite last year, when was the event on human rights when the Turkey wasn't not invited, but again, we don't see anything regarding what is happening, not just with media, but also in other crimes that he's committing. Thanks.
Well, with that, Ergun and actually, let me just come to Ergun, especially on this issue. Now, everyone, it seemed, and again, I've touched upon the issue of apathy. You've discussed just really in detail of the impact of the Armenian genocide up until the experience of the Kurdish people till today. Now, what is your warning to the world? And as I said before, authoritarian governments do not practice anything, import anything, unless they do it to their own people, do it to their own population. And so it seems like there is a possibility that some practice like this will spread throughout, outside of Turkey. And do you see that happening? And I think given the current situation in Turkey right now, it doesn't seem too far off. If you can maybe comment on that as well.
I mean, in terms of Europe, Erdogan has a very big leverage. Turkish community in Europe, indoctrinized by imams in Europe. Now France and Germany are taking some steps, so they are not going to send imams from Turkey anymore, and they will be trained and educated in France and Germany. But we know my numbers, there are about 7,000 MIT, Turkish Intelligence Agency agents in Germany, and a few thousand in France. At least 2,000 in Greece, we know for sure. So he can destabilize Europe easily. And we see when the first Syrian war started, European governments shattered because of Syrian immigrants. If you can imagine, just 5 million Turks and Syrians are moving towards European Union. So they have to support Erdogan. They are doing business with him. 50% of Turkish trade with Europe that are heavily invested in Turkey, especially Germany, France, and Netherlands. They don't want to lose money. But the problem, when the state loses this logic, they can harm itself. Now Turkey military is overextended. They have military bases in Qatar, Sudan, Somalia, occupation in Syria, in Iraq, Libya. And this is expensive, and Turkish economy is bankrupted. How can they survive this? And Kurds are fighting in northern Iraq. They are not winning the war. I disagree with Kani about Öcalan. I think he became successful. Before Öcalan, Kurds were mostly tribal groups trying to own their own culture and language. But with Öcalan, they became a people, a nation in Turkey. So we saw it in the elections also. They won all the Kurdish city in Kurdish geography in Turkey. Erdogan can play, has room to play, but it's getting limited. So he cannot overextend his hand, because he has also weaknesses. I say he has a building a high-rise for himself in New York City, and he has probably certain monies in Switzerland and Indonesia. So he cannot act freely. As we see, he doesn't speak against the United States as in the past. So he uses his media people for it. So he's kind of cornered.
So with that, Kani, with everything that you've shared, it seems that the Kurdish people, for example, have been utilized as pawns especially by the Erdogan regime, in the sense that they've been weaponizing migration, as we've heard from Ergun. Basically, it seems like Erdogan regime is using the migration issue caused by the actions of the Turkish government against the EU countries, and it seems like that's part of the reason why there is a giving in factor to all of this. If you can care to comment on that and enlighten us a little more about it from the Kurdish perspective and why it's very important for all of us to know.
I mean, if you were sitting in Europe and you were, in charge of your country, and you were looking at the Middle East, and a crisis generating refugees creating instability, and then spilling over to Europe, you would hope that one would hope that you would nudge Turkey towards solving this issue, and then resolving it. So far, it's been a military relationship. It's not a political relationship. I mean, U.S., in spite of what Obama did initially, and then Trump continued, and then Biden is continuing in Rojava. There's no political relationship that I see in terms of addressing this issue. They're still waiting to see maybe Syria will come together, and then this Rojava thing will just disappear. There's no, like the West is not saying let's accept a different state there, because in 1920s, a bunch of states were accepted. In 2020s, you could, Kosovo was invented or became independent, sorry. But I don't see that in the cards as we speak. But what I see though, there's a rising tide. And can Erdogan stop it? Like a rising tide of Kurdish awareness, Kurdish mobility, Kurdish, everybody has a state. Why don't we have a state? They have rights. Why don't we have rights? And that is going to go on with the help of internet, with the help of the modern age that we live in. No one is going to be able to stop that. Will Erdogan be able to stop it? I don't know. I don't think so. I think he's trying to use the Kurds. Yes, during the peace process, he was, in my opinion, trying to say, I'll be the waiter, you could be the busboy, and then we could, enjoy this country together. But it doesn't address the fundamental issue. The busboy waiter relationship doesn't address the problems of Turkey. What addresses the problems of Turkey is free press. What addresses the problems of Turkey is the fourth estate, and then the three, the judiciary, the military, or the presidency, and then the parliament, working together in cohesion. And my latest thinking is, expecting miracles in Ankara, it's really too much. I tell my nephews and my nieces, invest in yourself, educate yourself. When America became independent, when 56, selfless Americans signed the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't one person who signed it. It was 56 prominent Americans, and then the spirit of democracy was much more spread than when Atatürk took over or when Erdogan is now ruling the country. So if more Kurds, more Turks educate themselves, learn about their rights, renew themselves, increase their capacities, maybe we will be done with this nightmare, with this dark cloud that is hanging over our heads.
May I add this?
Sure.
No one in Turkey's divisiveness can win the election without Kurdish support. They are the critical votes in Turkey now. 10% vote is very important.
Exactly, it's extremely important. Now, we're coming towards the end of our time. I believe we're going a little bit forward, but I've been actually asked by multiple colleagues of mine from various communities if you have a very quick message especially for the journalist communities, the media, under a minute, and for the general public, of course. If you can now just pretend they're all listening right now. If you can give a message under a minute, just a quick message as to what, number one, what we can do, and what we should be doing, and if you would like to urge on any issue, that would be much appreciated. So,
yeah, I think my message would be. It is not maybe possible to convert China into a democracy in one night, but at least we need to keep democracies as democracies. So we need to be very much aware of keeping Turkey as a democracy and not losing America as a democracy. So there should be a very big awareness. And I know that the journalism is a tough job. In Gaza, we lost maybe more than 100 of our colleagues. And it's a dangerous job, and I appreciate all the efforts of the honest journalists around the world. And we remember those journalists who are in jail in Turkey. I underline again that we will not forget them. And I like my colleagues in the free world, in Germany, in Sweden, in America, in Japan, in Korea, to remember our colleagues that are not free to express their views. That will be a very big support for Turkish democracy and for the journalists in jail, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Arbana?
To ask from journalists who are under threat in Turkey, like we are sitting today in DC and we can say whatever we want and we're not going to get arrested as soon as we step out. I think that we should address this call to international media. They need to focus and address and not what was the last time we've seen an investigative piece on what is happening. So I think that we need to work out with our network in the international community and try to wear awareness among our community, because there are journalists all over the Western world that they have to start looking in more details, because as we said today, everything will reflect in other countries. And as we said, they are also in Western countries. So, and one of my focus was that even though I've mentioned the Turkish diaspora in Europe that supports him, it's not the Turkish. We have also other diaspora that are supporting Erdogan. So what I'm trying to say is if we do not investigate and bring into the world what is happening, that this all will reflect in other countries. And as I said, also with the leaders where I come from in the Balkans, because this is the whole point. They want us away from Western values, and that's why we've been the first to be attacked. Thanks.
I mean, we cannot expect much from our colleagues in Turkey. They are either cooperating with the state or fear of writing or telling the truth. You can find yourself in jail all over a night. But in diaspora, we are so divided, still divided. We have some individual examples of sample, let's say Metin Cihan. We didn't know much about this Israel-Turkish business. He tweeted about it, and we learned that Israel's military jets oil was going from Turkey, and it was being carried by Erdogan and his close family members on ship. And it had an impact on the election because other Islamic party, Refah, made out of an issue on it, and it eroded Erdogan bases because Palestine is a very sensitive issue between the leftists and Islamists together. What we can do, if we can manage to heal this divisiveness, first we should be able to come together, leftists, Kurdish, conservative journalists together, agree on certain rules, respect for the rule of law and truth, then maybe we can start working for changing Turkey. First, we should change. Without we have this mindset, seeing the other as the enemy, it's not easy to heal Turkey's main problems.
Kani?
I'll echo Ergun. It's when America became independent, when they were liberals, they were conservatives. After independence, then they kind of separated into parties, if you will. That spirit of uniting against Great Britain, in our case, liberal Turks, conservative Turks, Kurds, liberal Kurds, they have to be able to work together if they want to really make it to a better place. And coming to America, I mean, when Biden came to White House, the first interview he gave was, he talked about the struggle between democracies and authoritarians, and that he would do everything he can to support the democracies. I mean, I have been waiting. There isn't much he has done, and I know he hasn't done what Rice did in Ankara in 2005, but America has a big bully pulpit, as they say, could raise the issue of Demirtas, could raise the issue of Kavala, could raise the issue of other prominent dissident Kurds and Turks who are hurting, who are suffering, who are targeted, and spotlighting them, highlighting their They may have issues, they may have shortcomings, but but who doesn't? I mean, we're humans, we're not angels. But giving them a platform, allowing them allowing their messages to be heard, would be wonderful, and it hasn't been used, I would say.
Well, with that, before we end it, I think I think I would say that I speak on behalf of many of my colleagues back there. It's very clear that we haven't done enough, and we also apologize in advance because we could have done something, whether it was lack of awareness or just apathy or whatever it may be. It's safe to say that all of us in the world media have our work cut out for us. And for all of our members who have participated today, let me also take a bold step and say today we're no longer individuals. We're all persecuted journalists from Turkey and beyond. And I say this because if we do not identify ourselves as those who are persecuted, I think it's virtually impossible for us to really take any action that's realistic. And so with that, I would like to thank all four of you and many others who have bravely come up to share this message with us. And with that, if you would give a great round of applause to all of our panelists. And on a last note, we would say we stand with all of the journalists who are currently suffering in prison in Turkey. And also we stand with our colleagues Evan Gershwitz and Austin Tice, who are held in Russian and Syrian prisons. And today, again, we are no longer individuals, we're all together. So with that, I thank you also for giving me the honor of moderating such a great panel. And I guess we have another panel coming up after that. So thank you so much, everybody, and God bless.